The reality we live in can be a very strange place. Most of the time, fact being stranger than fiction. How will we ever start to understand this reality we live in unless we question everything? Join me and a guest as we unravel the mysteries of this reality, one topic at a time. This is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones.
What is up, Inquirers, and welcome to the expanse of deep open-minded conversation. I'm the one they call Shayn, and today for you guys, we're going to be diving into one man's journey waking up to the truths of this reality and the path he took to help better himself using philosophy and psychology, and how it's led him to new opportunities that he wants to share with the world. But before we get into that, of course, just a couple of quick news and updates. First and foremost, for anybody that listens to Bizarre Encounters, I recently updated the logo for that, so it has a fresh, new, clean logo. Big thanks to Chris from Conspire Theory, who is actually the one who did the Inquiries of Our Reality logo. Does absolutely fantastic work, so of course I have to give him credit where credit is due. And with that, of course, I've done a bunch of new updates to the merch store, including adding that new design to the merch store, and I added a new Mothman design to the merch store. So if anybody might be interested in that, don't forget to go and check that out. And another main piece of news and updates: on February 6th, Bizarre Inquiries is going to be doing a live show on YouTube. It'll be our first show in the new format, which will be an hour-long format with 3 articles, clips, or questions. And if anybody's interested in popping into that, there will, of course, be a link the day of, maybe a couple days prior. I'll be posting about it on social media if you guys want to keep tabs on that. Or you guys can always go and subscribe to the YouTube channel, Open Minds Media, and you guys will, of course, get a notification when we go live. But again, that's going to be February 6th at about 7:15 p.m. Eastern Central Time. So don't forget to go and pop into that, and you guys can pop into the chat, have some conversations, give your guys input on the stuff that we're discussing on the show. And if anybody has any clips, articles, or questions that they would like us to discuss on the show, feel free to send them over before that happens, of course. And one last thing, just a quick message. This podcast has a strong focus on community engagement, so I encourage all listeners to share their own experiences and research on the show. That said, if anyone would like to be a guest on the show, or if anybody has an encounter or experience that they would like to share on the show or have me possibly investigate, please email me at increaseofourrealitypodcast@outlook.com, or you guys can call or text the hotline. That number is 313-364-1551. And every single thing that I mentioned is all available on the link tree, which is available down in the show description. And with that, let's get into the show. What is up, guys? And please welcome to the show for his first appearance, and hopefully the first of many more, Vito from the Pillars of Wisdom. How's it going today, man?
Hi, man. Thanks for having me over. Really glad to be here. Really glad to have this conversation with you. Talk about the book, talk about many interesting stuff. So I guess I'll start introducing myself. I'm Vito. About to turn 25 years old soon. And
young, 24.
Yeah. I have a month left.
Hey, never too early to start diving into stuff, man.
Listen. I'm racially Italian, so being 24 is like being 37. It's I'm on my own timeline here. So that being said, I live in Mexico right now. I'm originally from Germany, or I grew up in Germany, but both my parents are Italian. And
got a pretty good mix there as far as like cultural differences and everything goes, man.
A lot. I went through a lot in terms of cultural stuff. I would say I'm culturally German, or I have that in me, but I also have my Italian racial tendencies, of arguing too much and being loud all the time. No, it is. But yeah, so, and I moved to Mexico about almost 2 years ago. It's going to be 2 years in about 2 months. Because of mainly economic reasons, Western Europe is not doing so well in terms of like economic wise, like especially with the Ukraine war that's going on. Everything is getting more expensive, especially gas prices. And I realized that my life isn't going to get better over there, so I have to find a solution. And I was in contact with the author of this book, who's also like the best writer on the Red Pill. And initially we started out as like, I just called him, asked him like, yo, like, so much stuff. Why don't you teach me some of that stuff that you know? Because I'm just curious, Mm-hmm. And then that relationship turned into me starting to work for him, and him telling me to move to Mexico because my life in Germany is not going to go well, right? Which, I did. I'm here, and I've been working for him for about 2 years, something like that. Basically, what I do is I help research articles. I also coach people. I teach them the stuff that I know, and I write myself. And so that's how I got into this whole thing, right? And after having called my mom about 2 weeks ago, and she's telling me how everything has gotten more expensive and how she can barely afford groceries, and how they've increased the tax rates and they've increased insurance rates, and increased the rent. So I was like, well, I'm glad I got out in time, because
it's the same thing going on in the U.S. right now too. I mean, it seems like it's pretty universal.
Yeah, I heard that's normal. That's pretty normal in the current society that we live in. It's just the economy, the way it works is it always spikes up, and then it declines over time before it spikes up again. But the problem is each spike up is less than before. And so what you'll have is this decline that everybody speaks about, right? But the decline of society, the decline of the economy isn't so much that it just goes down like this, in a straight line. But there's like good moments there, and you think that, oh yeah, everything is going to be fine from here. We're gonna recover from this, but you don't actually. And every spike up becomes less and less and less until at some point any gain that you make compared to the losses that you make are in the negative numbers, So, and that was sort of like my position when I left Germany. Everybody was fighting me on it. They were all saying like, oh, what are you doing? Like, it's a good system here and you have a good life here. Like, you can get a good job here. Why would you go for Mexico? What's in Mexico? And I was like, well, in Mexico, I can have a cheaper life and I have better tax rates, and overall, like, the quality of my life improves, right?
People have Stockholm syndrome to their home. It's like they don't want to leave because they always have that hope that it's going to get better. It's going to get better, but it never does.
Right, but their home is like a very abusive relationship. Mm-hmm. It's like a toxic relationship. You think that you can work it out, and you think that if I just try hard enough, it's going to get better. But the joke is that, like every other toxic relationship, it doesn't get better. It actually gets worse. The longer you stick around. And I know because I've been in some toxic relationships myself.
Much like all of us, we all have.
Right, we all have to some degree, yeah. But yeah, so that's what got me moving to Mexico. While I was in Germany during the pandemic, I was really radicalized. I was radicalized a little bit before in terms of like the education system, because I grew up in a working class family, and the way the education system in Germany works, it's more segregated, where you have rich kids sort of like get ahead in school and in terms of education, they get a better education. But if you're from a working class family, your education usually becomes less, right? And so I had to look for these outside sources outside of the system, like the author of this book who offered it, to sort of like give me that good education that I felt like I deserved, because and not to suck my own dick, but but I'm pretty intelligent, and I heard people tell me that I'm pretty intelligent, and they were all shocked that I didn't go to a better school. When I told them that it's because I grew up in a poor family, that's just how it is. The German state didn't see me as someone who is deserving of better education.
No different in the U.S., man. Like, it's depends on the area you're in. There's better educations in certain areas, and that's why everybody tries to do the school of choice, and they try to move their kids into the better areas. But as messed up as it sounds, then they get picked out because they're not the rich ones, because that's kind of what happened to me when I was a kid.
Right, exactly. And then you have like the ones who are rich, they pay they pay their teachers off and to get good grades and all that stuff. Like, there's like a lot of corruption going on.
Or they play sports and they assume that that's going to carry them all the way to college. So you had like a handful of kids at my school where they were like dumber than a bag of rocks, but they would pass just because they were like, they'll make it in college because they'll just play sports.
Right. You have that, right? So what you'll see is it's just very corrupt, and I guess that's how the system kind of holds up itself. You need to have like the rich kids going to good schools, so this elite circle keeps itself tight, because if you have someone like me or someone like you or someone like author of this book get into the elite circle, like, it's going to cause a bunch of chaos. Because obviously you come from a different background, and so you don't have that alienation from the working class as the elites do, right? And so
it's the free thinker that doesn't need to be part of a system.
You'll start having these strong convictions. And you basically want to do something more. And once you have that power, once you have that money, you'll start doing certain things that elites will disapprove of, so that, right? So that's why they can't keep you in those circles. They have to keep you out, because they know that once enough people do, it's going to cause like a certain regime change, which they really don't want, because they are enjoying their freedom and their power right now. But yeah. So, but then when the pandemic happened, right? And I realized that the system is more, I'm allowed to swear, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I realized that the system was way more fucked than I thought, because with the pandemic, it really showed, it didn't just show you how much the elite control in your life. It also showed you how much people would just fight you to sort of like stay in that exploitative system, in that abusive system. It's like they want to get abused, and if you're the one who doesn't want to get abused, you get attacked for it, because you're showing some form of originality or some form of individuality, and they just can't have that. They have to attack you for it, because you have to fit in and you have to follow the orders, because if you're different, then you're causing your grandmother to have a heartache.
That whole concept is just baffling to me. You get to the point where it's like people start policing each other, and I don't know if it's a matter of like how the bullying aspect works, where it's like the parent beats the kid, then the kid beats somebody else, so they just kind of push it down the line, or if it's a matter of just virtue signaling where it's like, trying to get that pat on the head, like, I did good today, I policed other people.
Right. So it's this forced choice of freedom that you have, right? It's like your mom telling you, hey, you have to call your grandmother, right? That's one thing. But if she tells you like here it's pretty clear that, okay, I don't have freedom. I have to follow these orders, right? But when she tells you like, you should call your grandmother because she loves you, and if you don't call her, you're going to break her heart, then here you are like, you're given the choice to call your grandmother. But the reality is that it's not really a choice, because if you don't, you're the villain, you're the bad guy, because now you caused your grandmother to have a heartache because you didn't call her, right? And so we're in this, that's how the pandemic kind of like worked so well, is they just got a bunch of people to be in that position of be the hero of the story, right? Where, but if you don't take the vaccine, if you don't follow protocol, then you could cause your loved ones to die. And we don't want that, do we? Like, it's a very condescending way of just forcing you to do something while still making it appear like it's your own choice, but it's clearly not your choice.
I mean, even with people's jobs too, they're like, all right, you don't have to get it, but you need to get it if you want to keep working here. So it's like, again, they're just forcing people's hands with this stuff.
Right. So they're telling you basically, you can choose to work, right? And you can choose to do your job. But then if you don't, you get fired. And then if you get fired, you can't feed yourself. You can't reproduce yourself, right? You can't reproduce your loved ones. And then all of a sudden, it's not so much of a free choice anymore, And now you're forced to follow protocol and follow the company's orders and follow management, because if you don't, you lose your job, right? But you're not forced to do your job. Nobody is forcing you to do your job, right? You're clearly doing this out of your own volition. And working these extra hours and staying up all night, and barely getting any sleep in the morning, that's because you're taking it for the team, and that's your choice. I mean, you chose this job, right? So you see how all, like, when it's forced, at least the consequences aren't on you, but on the person who's forcing you. But here, what's more evil about this is that the consequences are on you as well, And so not only do you have to deal with you being forced to do something, but you're also being made feel guilty for not taking care of yourself better, right? Because you live in this cage.
Hold on tight, everyone. Inquiries of Our Reality will be right back after this brief commercial break. But if you don't mind taking a second to follow Inquiries of Our Reality on Instagram and Facebook, and Open Minds Media on YouTube and TikTok, I'd greatly appreciate it. And feel free to spark up a conversation. I love getting to know you guys. And now back to the show.
And so people really love to, like you said, people really love to police others because it makes them feel integrated. It makes them feel part of something. And showing any sort of individuality or originality is traumatizing. So they'd rather just be part of something and have somebody else think for them, while they can police others and just, jerk themselves off that they're being a good person. Just fucking like out here like this, dude. So that's where we are as a society, right? And for me, when I realized that, wow, even my family members who I thought were close to me, who would like take my side on this, didn't. It turns out that like random strangers on the internet were more in agreement with me than my own family, who I grew up with my entire life. It's crazy times we live in.
Over in Europe specifically too, because I talked to somebody who was in Australia about this back when everything was going on, but I'm assuming you're in Germany when all this was going down. So hearing about it from like the US news, they made it seem like it was like a lot more of there, like a lot more people were on board than they are in the US. Like, I don't know if it was something that they were trying to kind of show with the media, like, oh, look, they're doing good, so maybe everybody else should follow along. But coming from somebody who was actually there when it was happening, like, was there a lot of resistance to it, or did it seem like everybody kind of just fell in line besides just a few numbers of people? Because in the US, it kind of almost felt like it was like 75% fell in line and like 25% didn't. But once it started rolling, it became like a 50-50 thing where, people may have gotten the first two, but then after that, they were like, all right, this is kind of getting weird. And it kind of split more where there's more people that are like against this. Right.
So the thing about Germany is it follows content ethics very closely, because that's their whole culture. It's built on these content ethics, which is to say that that you have a duty and you have to follow the duty regardless of how you feel about this, right? And so during the pandemic, I would say like 90% of the people were just following in line, and they disagreed. Some of them disagreed, but they didn't care, right? They were like, well, it's the rules, so I have to follow the rules. The rules are the rules. There's no debate. If that's the rule, then I'll have to follow that rule, and I can't think about my own self. I have to repress that and just fulfill my duties as a person, as a member of society, right? And so towards the end, more and more people got upset. And you started seeing more resistance because people were like, okay, this is preposterous. You keep moving the goalpost. Maybe this whole thing isn't real. But it wasn't a significant amount for them to really stop, A lot of people, even still after the pandemic, were still getting vaccinated. Even after the requirements were done, And so for them, this was a sort of like, it was easier to implement those structures in there because Germans just like to follow orders, because for them, if they don't, they feel like that everything would be running wild and be unhinged, which is what you'll see if you watch German porn, which has to do with a lot of prohibited acts like pissing on somebody,
The OGs of the smut film too.
Exactly. I am Hans, and I have to pee on the person, and I will pee on the person now. Watch me pee all over the place. But where does this behavior come from? It comes from exactly this restrictive, this repressive following orders without thinking about yourself or ignoring your own emotions.
So it's almost like you have a stronger counterculture because of how strict everything else is on the other side.
Right. So me, as an Italian, everything is sort of like speculative, and I grew up in an environment where, you have to justify your actions with words, because if you don't, like, well, what are you doing? Like, why are you acting this way? If you can't even justify yourself with words. And so there was a lot of discussing and happening in my family, and that's what I was used to. And so when I started to argue with people about this, it became more and more clear to me that something isn't like, why are people just accepting this like it's the norm, And when I did more research, I realized that this whole thing was a hoax. And it was just to crash the entire economy. That's really how it existed. And when I asked people like, why do you follow these orders when they keep moving the goalposts? Like, I even got into fights with my teachers back then, with my professors, telling them that they were like, oh, just we'll get to the other side. And I was like, we'll never get to the other side. They'll just increase the pandemic, the duration of the pandemic again.
I mean, once
and
you
again
start
and
giving
again
them
and
something,
again.
they're just going to keep trying to use that same
Right.
tactic again. Because I mean, you see it in the U.S. I mean, with the Patriot Act, they mark it under something that sounds patriotic, you know. But the whole idea was that, you know, we're saving you from a terrorist by making it so we check every single component, every single piece of anything you have going through the airport and doing all this
Right.
type of stuff. So it's like you scare people, and then you in turn end up tricking them into giving up their rights. And then once those rights are given up, there's no going back. They're going to keep taking
Right.
and taking and taking from it.
Right. And what you'll have at some point, what you'll have is just corporations having more rights over you than you have than you have as a citizen, you know. And so company policy becomes overpowers your rights as a human being, you know, your rights as a citizen, as a free individual, right? Because you gave up your entire freedom for these policies that came into being through these events. And again, like that's how they capitalize on everything. They create those events, they create those disasters, like the LA fire right now, you know, that's been happening recently, where their plan is to basically space laser these entire areas so they can buy them for cheap, you know, and then they can, I don't know, build whatever they want. There may be like 10-minute cities or 15-minute cities, you know, something like that. And that's how they capitalize on everything. Like they create those disasters, they create those pandemics, they create those war situations to, like you said, take away your rights for the sake of your own safety.
I think we got a new one going on right now, and this might be a good opportunity to bring it up because you probably would have some thoughts on this, but all the back and forth stuff going on with social media and, you know, what they're going to flag, what they're not going to flag, and then everything going on with Facebook. I don't know if you're one of those people that's up late night scrolling, but I usually am. And I've noticed that my feeds late night are all these like really, really dark, like dark web videos, like they're, you know, people getting murdered, all this kind of stuff. And this is on like Facebook and Instagram now. So it's, you know, people seeing this, they're like, all right, this is too much. So I think there's this other psyop going on where there's this weird back and forth with all the tech stuff, and everybody knows something's funky is going on, but they don't quite know exactly what it is. But I think that they're trying to do this thing where they're going to say, all right, we're going to let the gates open. Everybody can do whatever they want. And then once everybody starts doing whatever they want and they get to a point where they're scrolling through their feed and all they're seeing is people getting decapitated, they're going to beg for them to get rid of that type of content. So that's where you trick them. Everybody's been fighting back for this whole freedom of speech, freedom of doing whatever you want on the internet. But the way that they're going to be able to get rid of that is basically just unleash the floodgates, and then everybody will beg to be brought back into this safe, comfortable world where they don't have to go through decapitating videos. So, like, I don't know, this is something that's been on my mind, and I'm sure you've probably kind of thought about all the weirdness going on with social media, but talking about manipulation, I think there's a good spot to drop this idea I've been thinking about.
Right, exactly. No, totally. And again, like that, they use those disasters to justify taking over things. Like that's what philanthropists exist for. You know, they're like these public figures. They're like, oh, we'll save you from this evil world by playing into your self-interest and just buying everything. You know, we'll just buy everything we'll just start owning everything, and then that's how we'll protect you. You know, but what the part that's not being talked about is how they themselves planted those things before, and how they actually created those situations. And you wouldn't have those decapitating videos if they weren't the ones funding like terrorist groups who do the decapitating in the first place.
I mean, either that or they're trying to like get somebody to a point where they're so desensitized to it that, you know, they're willing to do other things. Because I mean, I even have these other theories about society where we kind of feel like we're turning into this point again where we're going to start getting into like blood sport for the sake of entertainment. So I mean, if you're viewing it from that aspect too, I mean, like I said, making it so that people are normalized to this type of stuff may not be too far out of the question, because it seems like blood sport kind of goes up and down in society, but it's bound to come back at some point.
The thing is, you know, and this is kind of like what the book talks about as well, is you know, like Bloodsport existed. Like, let me give you a brief history, right? Bloodsport existed because you had an excess of human beings, right? Because you had an excess of human beings, you needed a way to sort of like cause a equilibrium, right? And so what the Romans did is they had those gladiator games because they had so many slaves. They're like, okay, we have so many useless slaves, so we don't know what to do with them. You know, so let's just fucking throw them in a pit and have them fight each other. And then that excess population of foreigners just gets they brutalize each other for the sake of entertainment.
Say keeping everybody else quiet too, so they're not paying attention to what's going on in politics.
Exactly. So while the Senate is like scheming their way to stay in power, they basically put a bunch of like slaves to fight each other, and then you get rid of like an excess population, and at the same time you're entertaining a bunch of people. And so are they trying to bring back blood sports? I think right now you have like more effective methods of controlling human population. And one of them is just through like viruses and through vaccines and through mainly medicine, right? Also removing accessibility to medicine, to cures,
I mean, even in Canada, just letting people, state-assisted suicide. I mean, that's
right.
Just straight up. If you don't want to live anymore, you got a good enough reason. You ain't got to worry about it anymore.
Right, exactly. And that's how they. And it's more effective because when you create a blood sport, what you do is you create a bunch of warriors. You create a bunch of people who are like ready to fight. The problem is that when you do, those people who have already killed, they don't mind killing you, who is someone who's in power, for example, right? Or some of these elite groups, especially when they start banding together, And so the elite, they can't have that. They need you to stay a slave, right? They need you to stay a slave, so they have to hit you with like weird moralisms that keep you weak, while they just, slowly deteriorate your body through like disease and fatigue, and I wish there was blood sports. If we have blood sports again, you'd have at least some fighting going on. You'd have like a bunch of people who would be willing to kill someone to survive, or just kill someone for the sake of killing someone. And those people, when you accumulate them, they can be really useful if you want to do like a regime change, Like that's essentially what happened.
I mean, you can even use it for that, just to be able to pick some people out. And I mean, even on the other side, if you're worried about people revolting, like the only reason I bring up that theory is because it seems like it's a very common theme in media nowadays, with this whole idea of like people betting on, like Squid Game is a prime example, like people betting on, people basically killing each other, but in the end they get money. So it's like, there are their little break-off groups, but for the most part, everybody stays in line because they have this promise of money at the end. And I mean, it seems like every 10 years, we have a new variation of this that comes out. And it seems like it's something that they're not necessarily saying like, all right, we're going to do this tomorrow, but they want to keep it in the minds of people so that if they did want to usher it in at any point, they still kind of have it somewhat normalized where, anybody that watches stuff, you put yourself in the position of the people in the show. So it's like you've kind of put yourself mentally in that spot. And I mean, like I said, maybe it could be for the means of being able to pick out the people that are willing to fight, or on the other side, talking about getting rid of people, to try to save some money within the state. You start doing stuff like that with prisoners, and the average person's going to have no problem sitting and watching them die, especially if they, start creating these ridiculous scenarios like, oh yeah, this person is a child murderer and this person murders women. So then it's like, even if they try to break out, everybody in the audience isn't going to let them get past them at that point. Like, I feel like there are little things you could put in play, but I don't know. It seems like a concept that just kind of gets brought into the mental of everybody every couple of years. Like they're trying to keep it there so that when they have the opportunity, they might try to play it back in at some point.
Right.
Hold on tight, guys. We have to take a break and pay some bills. But if you guys don't like hearing the ads, then I have a solution for you. You guys can get ad-free and early access to this show and Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin on the Open Minds Media Patreon for just $1 a month. And it's a great way to support this show and all the hard work behind it. And if you're interested in merch store discounts, live access to episodes, or premium video versions of episodes, then there are a few other tiers with additional benefits with 7-day free trials available. And we are back, so let's hop right in.
And, what I think the way I think it works is always the most lazy option, right? And it is that maybe they're just showing those things so they can normalize the violence that they themselves use against the common man, and it's like, oh, like I've seen people get decapitated, like me, just being fatigued and disease ridden because of like shitty diets that are funded by the state, and radioactive rays that are coming from the sky. No, that's totally normal.
I mean, they could even be using stuff like that too for the sake of just showing the depravity of mankind, so that people don't feel bonded with their brothers. They feel like they have to worry about everybody at every corner because they watch this stuff and they go, wow, people would return really, really quick in these situations. So, if there's ever an opportunity where like shit hits the fan, most people aren't going to want to go to their neighbors because they have this idea that, when things go bad, that everybody's going to, be out for themselves and completely just annihilate everybody else. So, I mean, it could be some other subliminal thing that's pushing
standard,
people away from wanting to group up.
Yeah. But that's standard. Like that's like with Hollywood movies. That's always been the case with newspapers. It's always been the case. You always try to antagonize each other as much as possible because it's easier to exploit them like that, and it's easier to sort of like let me tell you about, again, a brief history here. There was the 2008 Occupy Wall Street, right? And that had potential to go to a sort of like regime change, But after Occupy Wall Street, like the ruling class became really, really worried. And so what they did is they shifted class consciousness to cultural consciousness, where it's to say like, oh, now all of a sudden like Black Lives Matter too, and what about gay people, and what about trannies, and what about these people and that people, and what about the culture of like white privilege and stuff like that, right? And so there was like a huge shift that happened from class consciousness to like, oh, but culture.
You start getting the poor people to fight within the poor people. And
exactly.
Even with like the current hip hop culture, like they're even splitting up like within African culture, where it's like, they have like, oh, if you like this rapper, you can't like this other person. People are arguing over this. So they're even like splitting within the cultures now.
Right. And so they have to, that's how they separate. That's how they separate you. Right. And that's how they keep class consciousness from happening. Right. So when, for example, the assassination on the CEO happened, you started, that was such a good thing because you got to see who was really on your side and who was just a psyop, like a psyop operative placed there to keep you away from class consciousness. There was a tweet from Matt Walsh who said, oh, people are celebrating the death of the CEO because he was a white man, and it just shows you how lazy psyops have become, because these people like they get paid whatever, and they don't have to try as hard, right? But then when class consciousness get developed, they're incompetent to keeping from people developing class consciousness. So they have to come up with any lazy excuse as possible.
They start throwing racial tags wherever they can on it, making it seem like it's something totally different than it is.
Exactly. And even on the liberal side, you got people play into it saying like, here's how you see, like, that's why we need to work together. That's why you need to accept trannies and homosexuals and all that stuff. So we can work together to get rid of those evil elitists, But, to some degree, there's some truth there, At the end of the day, class consciousness is more important than whatever cultural conflict there is. But then we also can't forget that it's those communities that actually perpetuate state apparatus ideology, that actually keep this narrative alive. They're the ones who don't do the fighting on your behalf. They'll do the fighting on the state's behalf because of all the benefits that they get from the state.
Oh, how the counterculture has shifted. I find that really, really weird that like the counterculture 20 years ago is now, the mainstream culture now, and the mainstream culture 20 years ago is now the counterculture now, which is essentially just being rational.
Right. And so, the problem is they're both part of the same coin. They're both just two sides of the same coin, and the elitists just flip whenever one side is being used up. Right. Every 20 years, that's a new generation. And so they'll just be like, oh, well, new generation, we could just play our old tricks again. We'll just reverse it and it'll be fine. They're not going to fall for it.
That's because everything has different names and different labels.
Right,
so that
right.
you trick people within the labels because most people nowadays don't pay attention to history. And that's why it seems to just constantly repeat itself at this point.
Right. And that's how they keep, that's how they keep the status quo alive. That's how they keep the state apparatus alive. Is they just use the same tactics. And there's so much effort put into, like, from the media side, into like prepping up those new leaders, but nothing changes. It all ends up the same way anyway. It doesn't matter if Trump is in office. It doesn't matter if Kamala Harris was in office. They're both, it's still going to go in the same direction. There's no difference between a war in the Middle East and a pandemic. They both have the same goal of just crashing the economy as much as possible so they can invent a bunch of policies that take away your human rights, and and that's sort of like the message in this book, in our book, is to say that, well, if that's happening, you can at least save yourself economically by just leaving. It explains all these people that are involved into this process. And I want to talk about one of these people today, actually. I want to talk about the goofy schmoofy today. But all these people, they put themselves in your life and they're all against you. So why take that abuse? Why take it? Just leave, go live a better lifestyle, somewhere else where you're more welcome. And it comes with its own problems, but those problems are better than whatever we're dealing with right now, And it's sort of like what can you deal with better? Is it a crashing economy, or is it being in a foreign country and having to learn a new language by dating a bunch of Latina women who don't speak any English, so you have to speak a broken Spanish to have a normal date with them,
They might think it's cute though.
Well, they do. Some of them do. Some of them get icky from it. I've had that experience. Where they were like, oh, so you don't speak any Spanish? I'm like, well, I speak Spanish. It's just good enough, good enough to have a 30-minute conversation with you and then try and get you home, So yeah, but that's pretty much what I always tell people. Instead of taking that abuse, they can just go live somewhere better, where they're more welcome, and where the economy isn't so hostile towards them.
You don't feel like the entire system's completely rigged against you, where as soon as you start getting ahead, they push you back down again.
They have to. And let's talk about it today, actually. Let's talk about it right now. Right? Let's talk about the goofy schmoofy, who is one of these people who does push you down, right? So the goofy schmoofy, that's someone who you probably had this friend in your group who's a bit odd. He's like keeping like a money ledger on you, and he's like trying to sort of like prep himself up every time. He's very egoic, he's very egoic. He tries to one-up you all the time. When you enjoy yourself a little bit, he gets like weirdly jealous and tries to pull you down, And there's actually a whole psychological structure to that, and it's called the schmoof cycle, right? So, but what is a goofy schmoofy? Well, a goofy schmoofy is just a dork. It's a dork who thinks he's not a dork, right? And so what he does is he acts in a certain way that follows the state apparatus, and he tries without knowing it. Like he thinks he's acting on his own volition, and what he does is as soon as you start doing well, he pulls you down, right? Because he can't keep up with the current system, right? That's just working fast. That's churning through people, so he can't navigate that. And what happens is because he can't navigate that, he always fails, but he projects that failure onto you. And because he fails all the time, he needs you to fail as well so he can egoically feel good about himself, right? And so what they do is they go through this certain cycle, right, called the schmoof cycle. And the schmoof cycle consists of 5 stages. So you have resurrection, conditioning, the climbing to the top, peak, suffering, production, and suffering consumption, right? So what's the resurrection part in the schmoof cycle is after the goofy schmoofy, after he has suffered enough from his failure, he is in the part where he starts self-soothing himself. So he starts to tell himself, oh, but I can do it, I can make it, I can rise up from this occasion. And it's like this certain prep talk that he gives to himself, and he gives himself this prep talk so he can move into the conditioning state, where that's when you see like those people, they go to the gym, all of a sudden they start reading books and they start like working on themselves, and they start posting those inspirational quotes on Instagram. I'm a Sigma Alpha Wolf who doesn't need anyone. I can do this by myself. And don't mess with me. Cause I'm the greatest dick sucker that's out there. Nobody can suck dick like I can,
AKA the goat.
The goat, exactly, the throat goat. So that's the conditioning state. So it looks like he's building himself up, right? And then these new opportunities start showing up. And he's like, oh, okay, so I can exploit those opportunities that come to me, especially that happens in a group setting. If you have any community, if you have any group friend or anything like that, they start exploiting those people to sort of like get on the top. I had this friend of mine who, he was here in Mexico as well. One of the things he would do is he would keep a money ledger on us saying, oh, this is how much you owe me for groceries, and we were like, okay, fine. We all eat from these groceries, right? So we should do our fair share. But one of the things that we realized is that over time, that money ledger became more and more expensive, but we didn't eat anymore. We still had the same food. And then he started charging us for like pizza that we had that was like for a party because he invited some people over, and like for something like dish soap, that he was using the majority of anyway, because he had the most amount of clothes. And at some point we did like some calculations and we realized that he was actually adding charges and making things more expensive than they actually were, and he didn't pay a lot of times he excluded himself from that money ledger so that he wouldn't have to pay any of it. So we would pay for his groceries essentially. Right. because we were all living together. And so we were like, this is just insane. And so we told him that he's not in control of the money ledger anymore because he's clearly exploiting that. And one of the things he did is, well, I still want to eat the food. I still want to eat from the groceries. But I'm not going to pay for any of it. I'm just going to pay for my own stuff.
That's always the response back to a situation like that.
Yeah.
Is rather than like admitting the fault, it's like, I'm just going to get my own stuff from now on.
I'm going to get my own stuff, but I still want to eat your food, without contributing. Like it's going to stay the same. And then we had to like throw him out because it got really bad to a point where he would I would come back from the gym and he'd make himself a steak, and he would like eat the steak by himself. And I'm like, yo, like, so you're just making lunch for yourself. You're not making lunch for everyone. He's like, well, it's my steak. I'm like, yeah, but you're using our kitchen and using our utensils and our gas stove, so if you're just cooking your steak, then go get your own kitchen, go get your own utensils, go get your own house and your own table, if that's how it's gonna work, but he didn't see that argument, and he thought that I was in it wrong despite everybody agreeing with me at the time. So we had to kick him out. But yeah, that's that climbing to the top. It's they see those opportunities in a group and they have to exploit them. And that can be either through a money ledger, or that can be through like going to parties and not paying for anything and saying, oh yeah, I'll pay you back, bro, but they'll never do,
Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back. But just a quick reminder, if you'd like to rock some gear for one of your favorite podcasts, creatures, or topics, hop on over to the Open Minds Media store on Etsy and Printify for a wide range of designs with new drops regularly. Welcome back to the show. Now let's dive right in.
Or they try and use your social circle to sort of like harass a bunch of women that are part of your social circle, which is also a thing. Like, Jesus Christ, this guy, like every time I would invite a woman over or invite women with her friends over, he would be the dorkiest guy who would just make them uncomfortable because he'd make it all about himself,
Trying to push them out so that nobody wins.
No, he would just well, that's one thing, right? But that's towards the end. Before, he would just pretend like he is the guy and like he is in the center of everything, until he wasn't, until he realized that everybody thought he was just being a weirdo, and then he would like get weirdly bitter about it and start like pushing people out, So there's these opportunities that show themselves, and they want to exploit them so they get on top. And let's say they do reach the peak. Once they are at their peak performance, once they're at their peak existence, what happens is they start feeling guilty, right? They start feeling guilty, and what they do is they now purposefully fail, right? So you'll see this with a lot of people who have relationships. They have these good relationships, right? But then they do stuff to sabotage them on purpose. Like all of a sudden they start ignoring their girlfriend, or they start cheating on her, or they start like being, or they start having like weird flirtatious engagements with other girls in front of her to make her feel bad, or they just straight up make her cry, which again, I have no moral obligations to that. I'm not saying, like, from a moral standpoint, I don't really care. If you're cheating on your girlfriend, that's I'm not disapproving, but I'm also not approving. You can do whatever you want. But psychologically speaking, like, there's this pattern. Why you're doing this? You're doing this because you're trying to sabotage your own relationship, because you don't feel deserving of the position that you're in, right? Because because when you're at the peak, like when you have a good relationship, you have to roll it forward. You gotta have, she can't be like your hot girlfriend forever or your hot ethnic girlfriend forever. If you ever dated a black woman before or a Hispanic woman, which I have, she can't be your hot ethnic girlfriend forever, or your hot girlfriend forever. At some point, she has to become your wife and the mother of your children. And then there's got to be grandchildren. And so it always rolls forward, right? Mm-hmm. To the next stage. And that rolling forward means that you have to allocate your resources correctly. Now, they grew up in a system that taught them to waste resources, to waste resources instead of allocating them for, like when you have a certain surplus, instead of like working with that surplus, you just waste it, right? So they have a good relationship. They feel bad for having a good relationship. And then they have to sabotage that relationship, right? So in that sabotaging that relationship or even sabotaging the friend group or the community, they create these failure processes where they fail on purpose, And in a friend group, that could be like them not showing up anymore, or that could be them just, being getting super drunk at a party and then either getting super depressed or super aggressive, or just starting fights out of nowhere, stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. Or in a work environment, even the coworker who doesn't perform his job anymore, and fails on purpose, and then tries to push all the responsibility onto you. And then gets caught, but he doesn't feel bad. He just keeps failing, and you're like, okay, dude, like you've been failing so much. Like at some point you gotta like realize the errors of your ways, right? You gotta like stop, but they don't because they're failing on purpose, Mm-hmm. And so that causes the suffering production, right? Where they create their own suffering over and over and over and over and over again, until they've created so much suffering that they can't produce any more suffering. Once you're at the bottom, you can't go any further down. Like that's it, you're at the bottom. And then where we're at is now at suffering consumption. So that's when you have that friend who just feels bad about himself. Oh man, I really shouldn't have cheated on my girlfriend, and I should have performed better at work. And oh man, I really shouldn't have started fights with all my friends, Man, I'm such a lonely person. I'm so fucked, And they stay in that stage for quite some time. Some people stay there for a year, 2 years, 3 years, before they go back into that resurrection stage again, where they're like, oh, Johnny, you can do it. You got the power and the strength to be the alpha sigma male wolf that you were always meant to be. But before that happens, they have to feel sorry for themselves, And so the question is like, how do you deal with those people? Is one of the things that you do is you keep them accountable for every word that they say. Now, you probably had this one friend who makes a promise, but then he never keeps it, right? So what do? You just write everything down he says. Yeah. By the way, if you want to see the graphs, we've got great graphs in this book. They look like that. Look at this. It's like a good illustration on the whole schmooth cycle.
Say, if you got a picture of that you can send me too, I can include it in the cover art so everybody can see it too.
Yeah, for sure. I'll send you a picture. There's this one as well. That's like, you can see this book has its own tarot deck. And this is the Hanged Man because you're subverting expectations, right? You're going for a cycle. Some deep esoteric knowledge right there.
I was going to say, we'll have to eventually start diving into the occult aspect of stuff too.
Yeah, we will. I'm just dropping it for now so that so that I don't hit people with it out of nowhere.
Gotta lay the groundwork.
Exactly. So how do you deal with those people is you keep them accountable for every word that they say. You just write it all down. If they make a promise, you write it down. Be like, okay, well, you make this promise. I'm gonna write it down, and if you don't keep it, it's here. I've written it down. You can't deny it anymore. You can't say you never said this. And it's one thing that people like to do, especially one thing that goofy schmoofies like to do. They like to say that they never said something, right? Or another thing is they try to focus on like small details. So one of the things when you confront the goofy schmoofy, what he'll do is he'll say, "Oh, but you did this like 10 years ago," which is completely irrelevant to them. Like, for example, like trying to flirt with your girlfriend, or trying to make, it's insane. Like this guy, he really tried to make my girlfriend fat one day because he was jealous that she was better looking than his girlfriend. So he's like buying her pastry every day, her favorite pastry, to try and get her to fatten up. And I'm like, why are you buying my girlfriend pastry, bro? Like, that's fucking weird.
That is definitely weird.
That's weird. Like that's like the third time in a row. Like, what are you trying to do here? He's like, "Oh, I'm just trying to be nice, haha." And I'm like, I don't think you're trying to be nice, dude. That's like, you're being a bit too nice, okay? You don't. I don't mind if someone gives my girlfriend's gifts, but if you're buying her pastry like every day, that's a bit weird, But when I confronted him, he's like, "Well, you did this like a couple months ago. You were like buying my girlfriend I bought his girlfriend a ring for her birthday, and it had like a little butterfly on it." And he's like, "You bought my girlfriend a butterfly ring like a couple months ago. Like, why can't I buy your girlfriend like pastry?" I'm like, "You're clearly trying to change the topic here. You've been buying my girlfriend pastry like for 3 consecutive days, and it's getting weird, bro." But he didn't see that part, right? He refused to acknowledge it. So I had to resort to just writing everything down that he said, and then addressing it like that, because he would try and confuse himself, and he tried to change the topic, and he tried to focus on like other things,
Passing the blame.
Right, passing the blame, exactly. Or in psychoanalysis, a professional term is collapsing to the imaginary. Focusing on these weird, like small details that don't matter. It's like when you tell someone, "Hey, it's like when you're trying to tell like a pedophile on the playground, 'Hey, stop watching the kids. You fucking pedophile.'" And he's like, "Oh, but you have a weird mustache." You have a weird mustache. So why do you get to say that I'm being a fucking weird pedophile with your weird mustache? So like that. That's what they do, right? Because that's how they can steer away the conversation, right? And because they don't like being confronted, they'll try to avoid conflict as much as possible. That's like one of the key features of them. That when you do confront them, they want to avoid that confrontation. And that's why they ignore their girlfriends a lot of times, because addressing your girlfriend, there's a dialectic happening. You're talking to her, she has a problem, she's telling you something, and you're interacting with her. There's a dialectic happening, but they don't like that. They want to stay in homeostasis, right? And so what they'll do is they'll just shut every dialogue down. But how you deal with them is you just don't let them. You just keep them in that conflict. And you start writing things down. You start addressing, holding them responsible for every word that they say. And that's how, to tie it back to our previous conversation, that's what helped me go through the pandemic against my friends and family. When I would confront them about this, and when they would, like my grandpa, he would tell me to get vaccinated, and And when I would confront him about it and I'd tell him the facts that, hey, listen, like this vaccine is not healthy. It's not good. I'm not going to get vaccinated. He would like, oh, you've always been crazy and you've always been this weird fanatic guy. Like, just get the vaccine. Who cares? You know? But then I would have to like...
It's the principle of the matter.
Right. And I would tell him like, what does this have to do with me telling you that the vaccine is literally killing you from the inside out? You know? But again, he wouldn't listen. He would just murmur something afterwards and just go into his room, you know, or go into the kitchen at the time, right? And so that's the thing. Like, even with my friends, I did the same thing. I would tell them like, listen, don't get the vaccine because of this and this and this. And they're like, yo, but it's like for our safety and stuff like that. And I'm like, how is it for our safety? And they're like, well, I don't really want to have this conversation right now.
Because they don't know the answers. They're just spatting back what they've been told without actually knowing the backing behind it.
Exactly. So they don't know the answer, but instead of admitting that they don't know the answer, instead of admitting that they're in the wrong, they'll just avoid the conflict.
This is like trying to talk politics about with anybody. Is most people,
right.
They have this very hard stance on their specific side, but when you actually start trying to have an educated discussion about it with them, they all of a sudden start saying, well, you're this, and it's like, well, I didn't say that. I'm just trying to understand your opinion so that, you know, they can't have that educated conversation, because as soon as you start doing that, they realize they're back into a corner, and then they just kind of result with the personal insults or pointing things out that are your flaws. And yeah, it's just this repetitive cycle of people are misinformed. So rather than admitting that they're misinformed, they start passing the blame somewhere else.
Right. But instead of letting them put like a label on you, you just keep addressing their points. You keep addressing their argument. You know, and if they try to avoid that conflict, you know, then you just tell them, you leave this conversation right now. It's not going to stop. I'm not going to continue talking to you until we finish that conversation. You know? And if they say, oh, you're making me uncomfortable and stuff like that, then no, but you started this. You started this conversation in the first place. You made the strong argument that I should get vaccinated or that I should follow these restrictions, you know? And then when I confront you about it, now you don't want to have that conversation anymore. So you're not trying to have a conversation with me. You're just trying to convince me to poison myself, you know? That's how it is. That's how it works. And so that's why you can't let them off the hook ever. When they start a conversation, you just got to keep them in that conversation. You got to hold them accountable for every word that they say. Because if you don't, like, that's how they get you. That's how they have that gotcha moment, right? And that's how they feel like.
That's why they think they can just scream until they get their way, too. Because there's a lot of people that they'll get into this argument and they'll just turn it into like a no,
right.
no. And they just have a temper tantrum until you basically just give up or just say, all right, I'm done with this. And then they think that they won and they get the gratification that they won when you were just done with it.
Right. Exactly. And that works. That maybe worked for them in the past, but it can't work with you. Because once it does, you know, that's how they just, you know, that's how they make like these weird side jabs at you, and then they run off. It's like a little rat that just sneaks in. You know, it's like a little kid sneaks in, kicks you in the nuts, and then runs off.
Literally.
Like a little gremlin, like, you know, that's how they come up to you, you know, and you're like, yo, you just fucking kicked me in the nuts. Like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, you shouldn't have put your nuts in my way in the first place. And then they run off again, you know? So
tell me that doesn't sound exactly like the fires in LA right now, where, you know, they're talking to the one fire chief and the response was, well, you know, if they were a bigger person, maybe they shouldn't have got themselves in the fire in the first place. Like,
exactly.
Just these responses, just like,
and that's just someone who is that, like, this person is a goofy schmoofy herself. It's a prime example for goofy schmoofy, where she has a job to do. Like, her job is to be a firefighter, but then she's like trying to avoid the responsibility by making a say. You know, she just says, well, if I have to save you in the first place, then maybe you shouldn't have been there.
That is like the most outrageous statement ever made by a firefighter that I've heard ever.
Right. Right. And it's like, yo, like, this is your job. What are you saying? What's, are you even working?
That's like
correctly?
insinuating somebody just lit the house on fire themselves and sat there like, oh no, somebody rescue me. Like,
yeah, exactly.
It's not like it's on purpose. Nobody gets themselves in that situation on purpose.
Right, exactly. You just get there. But for her, she doesn't want to do her job. So she makes those confident sayings, right? Again, that's like a Goofy movie at its peak. She makes the confident saying of, well, he shouldn't be there in the first place.
Sitting up on that high horse.
And then, yeah, exactly. And then they look at you with this like weird, that I call it the Goofy movie look, like, you know, that they have. And you can tell in their face, like, because you know, the unconscious knows what you're doing. It knows that you're trying to avoid responsibility. It knows that okay, you're like literally lying to people right now, and you can't hide that facial expression. You know, you can't hide those expressions in your face and your body language when you're trying to avoid responsibility, because avoiding responsibility is the equivalent of lying. You know.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And we are back to the show. So let's hop right in.
And so she says, like, she doesn't want to do her job. She doesn't want to do her job. And she just likes the position of being a firefighter. She likes having that privilege. She's enjoying that. But when you confront her, she doesn't want to have that conversation. She tries to avoid it by making these real confident sayings. But that's exactly when you catch them, right? And that's where people should have been like, but you're a firefighter though. Like, what do you mean? Like, this person shouldn't have been there in the first place. You know, you just ask them to explain themselves and you'll see that they can't. And they'll just try to avoid more and more responsibility until at one point you have to just, you'll just have to resort to violence by saying like, okay, like if you don't do your job, people are going to die. And I want to treat you like somebody who's trying to murder people right now. You know, like it's the same thing. Like that's what I said to my manager during the pandemic when she told me that I have to get the vaccine or I'm getting fired. And I told her that, well, if you're forcing me to take the vaccine, I'm going to treat you like a person who's trying to poison me right now. So I will defend myself from being poisoned by someone like you, right? And for her, it was a complete shock that I'd be willing to say that. But for me, it was, and she's like, how dare you say that? You know, and I told her, well, how dare you tell me to get to get poisoned, essentially, you know? And so it's the same thing. Like you just hold them accountable for what they say. And by holding them accountable for what they say, you catch them in their lie. And as soon as you catch them in their lie, that's when they delegitimize themselves, you know? And that's when you have public opinion go against them, you know? Like with this firefighter, if people started pushing into her more, you know, then she would have lost that credibility. And I think she already did.
Oh yeah,
just
easily.
by saying something like that, you know. But where are the consequences? Where are the consequences of not keeping your word, of not doing your job? You know, where are the consequences of you trying to avoid responsibility, which costs life? You know, it costs lives. Like people died in those fires. You know, where are the consequences for these failures? They don't exist. They're not there. You actually have more consequences in prison than you do outside in the world, which is a fucked up reality that we live in.
Yeah, because we've gotten to a point where it's like you can't point fingers at people anymore because then it becomes this whole other thing where it's like, oh, you can't be mentally traumatizing me like that. You can't be doing this to me. How dare you come after me and harass me? Like it turns into this whole other thing because again, people aren't held accountable for their actions and now they just slap these other labels on it, which is kind of going back into that cycle of you said that they started pointing out all these, well, it's this, well, it's this, well, it's this. Well, it's like, no, you're actually manipulating the system. So we're calling you out on your shit. Sorry.
Right. Exactly. And then that's when they start getting weirdly emotional, and they start having these weird sentiments of, oh, I just be a good person. Just find it in your heart. How dare you do that to me? Like, you're really hurting me right now. But for me, it's like people usually cave in after that, and they stop. But what I say is, no, you don't. You keep going, because that's another manipulation tactics of them that they use against you.
Yeah, they're playing the victim at that point.
Exactly.
Poor me.
Playing the victim. Exactly. And so you can't let them play the victim, because you're like, no, you can't play the victim right now. You said this, and that's your responsibility. And now you're not following on your responsibility. So there has to be consequences for your actions. Because if you don't, then nobody will. If one person doesn't follow their responsibilities, then why should I follow my responsibilities? And I can start avoiding my responsibilities too, right? And the next person, and cascades like that. And you can see that it actually does.
That's the cycle we're in currently.
That's the cycle that we're in currently, exactly, because people are not being held accountable. People aren't being held accountable for their actions, especially people who are in these middle positions, especially those people who are supposed to do their job, but they're not doing them. You have your politicians, you have your lawyers, you have your firefighters, your police chiefs. They're not doing their jobs. They're just sitting on their title, and they're enjoying all the fruits of their reputation, But then when it comes to doing their job, that's when all of a sudden, it's complicated and it's too hard.
Should have never picked me for this position in the first place.
Exactly. Like, why me? Like, you should, why am I in this position? Like, I'm not competent for this. You're right. Someone else should be. You should be in that position. And I had this with a friend, actually, the same guy, when I told him, like, hey, I had this with a coworker when I told him, like, hey, I need you to follow through on this paperwork, or else I'm going to have to reroute around you and find someone else. And he would literally say to me, well, you should find somebody else to route around me. And I'm like, I don't think you understand what that means. If I have to route around you, then that means that's grounds for being fired, because then you're useless. And I'm going to go to management with this, saying that I can't work with you because you're being useless. And he's like, listen, there's so many people in this company. Why am I the one who you're going to? And I was like, because you're responsible for this paperwork.
Because it's your damn job.
That's your damn job. Exactly. But then he said, well, there's other people and they do the same job as I do. You can't just be going to me. And I'm like, no, you don't get it. Like, that's your assignment. Like, you don't get to say that other people can do your assignment.
You're just showing you're expendable at that point.
But that's what they like. That's what they want, because again, like when you're at that peak position, it comes with a lot of responsibilities. And so they'll just avoid these responsibilities by saying, that's again where the failure happens, of them failing, saying that, yeah, then I should be expendable and someone else should do my job. That's that cycle. That's when they fall from that peak. It's when they fall down again. Because now they realize, oh shit, I'm at the top. I have all these responsibilities now.
I don't want any more.
I don't want it anymore. Like, oh my God, people are now coming to me to do my job. You know what? That's the moment I realized that I don't like my job, and I have to switch careers, And
taking the easy way out. You got to always take the escape route as soon as you get to a point where you realize that, your skill set's caught back up to you and you're in a position that's exceeded what you're actually able to do, or that you want to do, I guess.
Yeah. And the same thing goes in a relationship too, It's like your girlfriend has a fight with you. Instead of talking through it, all you do is like, well, I guess it's over now. I guess this relationship just wasn't it, And it's the same in relationships. It's the same in marriage as well. You have the same thing in marriage as well, especially with women. When as soon as things get hard, instead of working through them, they just leave, because now they have a responsibility to their husband or boyfriend. But instead of following through, they're like, well, it just didn't work out.
It's a throwaway culture. Wait, I can just go out and get a new one.
Right, because any surplus that you create, you've been taught to waste it. You've been taught to, like, since childhood, you've been taught that instead of building onto your surplus, you can just throw it away. You can just get rid of it. And that's the culture that we live in. Of instead of like rolling the surplus forward into something more productive, or something that can be something more enjoyable, you just throw it away. That's how the system keeps itself alive. Because as soon as you have any surplus, if the elite were to allocate their surplus onto the masses, maybe not directly, but indirectly through better infrastructures, we could have a better society, right? But that means that there's now less exploitative methods, and there's less short-term gain, because now people are living better lives. With the current technology that we have, you wouldn't have to work 8 hours a day. You could work like 3 hours a day just fine, and still make the same amount of money, and still make enough money to just reproduce yourself as a human being, but they need to keep you they need to keep your working hours longer and the intensity higher, while at the same time upgrading their technology. So they just can extract more and more and more out of you. And so, but if you know that surplus could be allocated, then what happens is that system doesn't work anymore. And so now you're being taught behaviors of, well, it's normal to waste surplus, and it's normal to throw away things, and it's normal to not roll things forward. And so if it happens to you, then you can just do it to somebody else as well. And that's how these goofy schmoofies, they develop, because the education system just brings them in that psychological structure.
Yeah, it's programming. They set people up in that process so that nobody gets to a point where they're able to rise ahead. It's rather that most people will shoot themselves in the foot as soon as they're about to, and then keep themselves in that same repetitive cycle. Exactly.
And that's how they can keep exploiting you, and that's why when but it doesn't work with anyone, because you'll always have your fanatics, and you'll always have your creative people who are smart enough to see through it, and who have like this drive to create something new. And so, but again, you don't need to convince everybody of that. You just need to convince enough people with that crap in a bucket mentality to pull everybody else down who wants to rise above, right? Like that's a perfectly valid strategy. And so what you'll have is a moment of where the captive becomes his own capturer as well. Prisoner becomes his own prison guard.
Yeah, you end up policing your friend group. You have like one in the group that's like that, and they pull everybody else down, and then it keeps people in this repetitive cycle. Because if it's taught programming, of course there's going to be people that break away from the programming, but if there's still the majority that are programmed, then they can keep those ones that broke away, not necessarily in the same cycle, but again, still dragged down with them.
Right, exactly, because that's easier. That's easier done, right? And that also saves the elite a bunch of resources to try and correct your behavior, because like concentration camps, corrective offices, and stuff like that. That's very expensive, It's expensive to maintain. It's expensive to build. It's easier to just program a bunch of people to act in their own self-interest and think that that's a normal thing and that that's a very human thing, and then pull other people down who are a bit more creative, who are more fanatic, who want to rise above whatever the system has programmed for them or predetermined for them. That's easier. It's cheaper. And you'll see that the elite will always find the cheapest, easiest solution to everything. And that's how they act. And that's why they're going to do another pandemic, because, again, it's cheap and it's easy, and they've done it before.
They know it'll work at least for a good chunk of people.
Exactly.
And the rest of them, even if they don't agree, they'll just fall in line to follow the crowd. Exactly.
They'll follow the crowd. And those who don't care about following the crowd, they'll get pulled into it anyway, because they'll just get coerced by their friends and family members and their boss to follow in line. Of like, well, if you don't get vaccinated, you would lose your job.
Or they'll get alienated altogether, because that's the other kind of aspect that they put people in, where it's like, all right, you people that are against this, you guys can just kind of be in your own little groups and blah, 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 blah. Like, they kind of got that mentality going too.
Right. Any method that keeps the system going, they'll just use it. And it doesn't matter like what the process is, as long as it keeps the system perpetuating. That's the most important part. And they don't care how it's done, as long as it's done and as long as it's cheap and easy. So that. But yeah, that's how these people are created. That's pretty much it.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. And we are back. So let's get back to it. So, definitely a fascinating thing to think about psychologically, because I'm sure that's one of those things that everybody's seen this cycle. They've seen it repeat, but they never quite knew like a name or like a specific like rhyme or reasoning to it. So, if people are just aware of that information and they can view it from that perspective, then it kind of gives you a little bit more of like a framework to be able to work against it and make it so that, like you said, kind of hold these people accountable for their actions. Because, most people that are arguing with the people that just don't want to hear it from them, they're just blah, 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 like I'm right, you're wrong. It's like, you get to a point where they get annoyed, but if you hold them responsible for the information that they're throwing back at you, then it kind of brings in a whole other light to the situation where, they may get more ramped up. They may get a little bit more crazy on the other side of it, because you're almost like breaking their subconscious programming in this situation. But it's kind of like the ultimate thing where it's like, everybody who plays the victim, if you stop letting them be the victim, then they're going to get to a point where nobody feels sorry for them. And then where do they go from there? And then they have to reformulate how they're going to go about their arguments from then on out. So it's like, you're almost helping people break the programming that they subconsciously have. And in turn, maybe some people are viewing it as like, leave those people alone, like you're bullying them. But honestly, you're helping them better themselves by holding them accountable for their actions, so that hopefully they can grow to be a new person, because everybody's afraid of change, but that's what life's about. It's about changing. It's about evolution. It's about, becoming better than you were the day before. And people get too into this thought and cycle that they want to be stuck with the nostalgic aspects of life, and they don't want things to change. But again, without change, like there's no growth. There's no point to continue doing what you're doing unless, again, you can just better everything around you. And in turn, if you continue doing that, for anybody who has kids out there, whatever, like, you may not see major changes within your generation, but the end goal is that, the kids will rise up. They'll be the ones that are able to break this and keep going on to a better society. So it's like, you may not see the end work today, but if you keep this mentality and mindset in mind and you help people break away from it, then it's going to help to improve farther generations where they can't play this victim mentality, because we're stuck in a society where everybody always thinks they're a victim and nobody wants to just admit defeat or admit that they've made a mistake. And I've learned quickly that as far as like respect goes, you respect the people that actually own up for their actions more than you respect anybody else. And in turn, it's like, those people, they are willing to get better. They're willing to grow. They're willing to not make that mistake again. But, there's not that opportunity to learn unless you call them out on it to get them to that point where they can better themselves.
Right, and that's the magic of this book, right? That's the magic of this book, is because it shows you those structures. It shows the different structures and different solutions to these different structures, right? And so, like in this specific article, like it shows you how to deal with those people who keep trying to ideologically interpolate you into state apparatus, who try to keep you like into the system, into the matrix, so to speak. Like, how do you deal with those family members, with those friends, with those coworkers who like constantly trying to avoid responsibility, but they keep making these small jabs at you, and they keep trying to victim blame, or they shift the blame to something else, And so that's one aspect. The other aspect is, if any of your audience is like that, which happens. It's fine. We still love you. We still accept you.
Just better yourself, man.
Just better yourself.
Admit defeat sometimes, and in turn grow from that, man. Like, there's two ways of looking at things, and I always see things as either you win or you learn something, and other people need to start viewing it that way. There's not necessarily a loss. It's an opportunity for growth, man.
Exactly. And so you can use this book to learn those theoretically learn those behaviors about yourself, and then catch them and stop yourself from it. And again, I've had clients who wear goofish movies, themselves. And they, after reading this book, they did say, man, I've read that chapter and I really saw myself in it. I'm such a goofish movie. I really need to fix myself here, And the fact that a lot of times you do those behaviors because you're not aware of them, because you're unconscious, and they just kind of they just leak through your language, through your grammar, through the words that you speak, or through your actions, right? But when you become aware of it by reading the theory, which is why reading is so important, by reading the theory of it, you start to realize that why you're doing these certain behaviors, and that's how you can start bettering yourself. Like, that's the first step to improving yourself, right? So it goes two ways. It's both for people who have, like, especially this article, right? This topic itself, but the book itself in total, it's for people who show these certain behaviors, but also for people who deal with those other people who show those behaviors. How do you navigate that?
So you have to be aware of behaviors in order to be able to move around them. So, I mean, kind of playing into what you were kind of saying a little bit earlier with the occult aspect kind of coming into some of this stuff. Something I've been saying on the show for a very long time is that everybody thinks the occult is like magic and this and that. But I think honestly, it's just a master understanding of psychology, because when you start breaking this stuff down, it's like you start seeing the framework of how society functions. So in turn, once you understand the framework of how society functions, then for lack of a better term, you can learn how to manipulate it in your favor, and hopefully in a positive way, which is where the magic aspect comes in, is that it's magic, quote, so to speak, isn't necessarily good or evil. It's all about in which the person chooses to use it. So, if you start understanding the construct about how everybody's mind works, how everything works, you can start manipulating, again, for lack of a better term, stuff around you, and hopefully in a positive way. That's where the occult aspect plays in. It's just a mastered understanding of psychology and how to push society into whatever means you're trying to do. But the trick and the hard part comes in with the whole people talking about being aware of stuff. If you're subconsciously aware of something, then the programming works, because you're not aware of it on a conscious level, so you can fall into these ruts because these ruts subconsciously, and then you turn into them. But on the other side, if you start reading books like yours, or any of these other philosophical writings, then you become aware of it consciously, so then you can counteract it consciously. Kind of a weird way to think about it, but
right, exactly, because at the end of the day, what you're dealing with is the unconscious. And what makes the unconscious is that you're not aware of this behavior. But how do you become aware of these behaviors? A lot of times it's not through introspection. Because again, you keep lying to yourself. Like those structures have been there for so long in your life. Talk about someone who is a goofy schmoofy, right? You've been a goofy schmoofy for so long in your life that how can you now all of a sudden like look into yourself and think that that's the truth? Whatever self revelation you have, and how do you know it's a real self revelation, or if it's just another one of your cycles where you try to condition yourself to climb to the top?
Condition yourself to be the hero so that you can eventually become the one that everybody feels sorry for again. Because you also weirdly, those type of people, they gain power when they're in that state because they want people to feel sorry for them. When people feel sorry for them, it gives them motivation, and that's when it starts to cycle back up again. Because it's usually either people will boost them up because they're sad and then it'll start the cycle again, or people will stop listening to them and they don't want to hear their shit anymore, and then they'll be like, all right, maybe I need to do something to get people's attention again. Because these people are the same people that are attention seekers.
Right, exactly. And so a lot of people aren't aware of that behavior, but the way they do become aware of that behavior, if they're not egoically so invested, is just by reading it on the outside. Right? If somebody else tells you, like, it's one thing if your friend tells you that you're an asshole. It's another thing if somebody with a PhD, who studied human psychology tells you that you're an asshole. That has a little bit more weight because he's not saying to you that you're an asshole out of any emotional thing. He's saying it to you because he's a professional. He's a professional asshole caller, That's his thing. That's his job. And so it has a different weight. But again, like the problem is again, a lot of people, they are very egoically invested into their psychic structures and they don't want to change them. Right. And so when you try to point that out towards them and you try to tell them like, okay, like here's what's going on. And they start saying, well, how do you know that that's the same thing with me? Like, you're not in my head. You don't know, or maybe that's true, but it doesn't apply to me. That happens all the time. It's pretty standard, right? But again, what's useful about this chapter, and again, about this book in general, is it gives you all these methods to deal with those different struggles that you might have in your life, and one of these struggles, as sad as it sounds or as silly as it sounds, is just this one friend who is a complete goofball and just tries to purposefully pull you down so he can feel good about himself. We all had that friend. We all had that guy in our lives, and we all had to get rid of him at some point.
Ain't that the truth? And man, I love diving into these psychological aspects of things, and I definitely think that this was a good setup to bring it into a little bit deeper topics that we're going to get into next time. But sometimes you just got to get a feel for people. This is the first time we've really talked on a show, and now I see where everything's kind of connecting with where you came from with the past and how you actually started studying people around you to really start to understand and break down these occult concepts, which again I think are just a master understanding of psychology. And I feel like I can't say that enough. Even the MK Ultra stuff, man, master understanding of psychology, man. So I'm really looking forward to what we might end up diving into next time and laying some breadcrumbs into what we might end up digging into.
Right. Yeah. So next time, what I want to talk about, and I think I wrote it down. Let me check again. Mainly, so I mentioned the goofy schmoofy and how the current system is creating these goofy schmoofies, right? But in order to understand the creation of the goofy schmoofy, you also need to understand the creation of the system, or how the system works. And so next time, what I really dive into is how Keynesian economics caused the death of so many young people from our age, because from there we'll start to see, okay, how does the current economic system create those people who have this crab in a bucket mentality, who have this throwaway culture. That's sort of what I want to dive into. Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to get a copy of this book myself too, because I definitely want to be able to read through it and check it out myself too. So Stay tuned, guys. This is our last break. But if you guys enjoy the show and think I deserve it, please leave a review or rating for the show on iTunes or Spotify. Your continued support is what makes this show possible, and your opinions go a long way to help the show grow and improve. So thank you. Now back with that deep conversation you crave. Before we get into where everybody can find the book and where everybody might be able to find you on social media, I always like to end the show with words of wisdom. So I know you've been talking some awesome words of wisdom almost the entire show, but if you just have to throw a new one out here, what might your words of wisdom be today, man?
Just one of the best advice I can give is to just go where you're treated best. Go where you're treated best. So if you have family members, if you have friends, if you have managers and bosses who keep trying to pull you down and who keep trying to make your life miserable, you don't have to go through that. Like, nobody's forcing you to go through that. There are ways out. There are different methods where you can pull yourself out. And one of them is to just go to a place where you're welcome. And for me, that was Mexico, and I came here. And I'm living the best life I've ever had, and whatever is happening in Germany, I don't have to deal with it. And whatever's happening with the people who they pulled me down, I don't have to deal with them because I physically just removed myself from them. And a lot of times that's the best option that you have.
It's like that toxic family trait where, everybody thinks that blood makes family, but that's not necessarily the case. Like sometimes you have to remove yourself from a toxic situation in order to better yourself and get your head clear. And people need to kind of realize that instead of sitting and always sulking in just the filth that's around you, like at a certain point, you have to realize that it's toxic and you need to separate yourself from this. And I'm talking from experience here with me separating from certain people in my family and stuff too. It's like you get into this vicious cycle where you always think that they're going to do better. So you stick and you stay around. But once you realize that nothing's ever going to change, you remove yourself and you'll be in a happier spot than you've ever been in your life before.
Right. And again, like you said, blood, family's blood, right? But blood can be toxic too sometimes. And sometimes you have to go for a cleansing period to clean up the blood. And that means getting rid of some.
Ain't that the truth?
So.
And if anybody wanted to come and find the book, they possibly wanted to contact you to even possibly share some different philosophies or anything like that, where might people be able to find you and the book on the internet?
So they can find us on the pillarsofwisdom.com. Pillarsofwisdom.com, pretty easy. We also have our own Instagram, and we have a Substack. You can find us on Substack there, where we write different articles every week, also called the Pillars of Wisdom. So go check that out if you're interested in interesting articles.
Some wisdom.
Of which are mine. Some wisdom, exactly. Some of these articles are mine. Some of these articles are from the author of this book. And pillarsofwisdom.com, that's our main website. That's where you can buy the book. And we currently have, this is the old cover. So we just finished our new cover, and it's exciting because we have to print, this book is so extreme that we have to print it from Greece because Greeks don't speak English. And our previous publisher was like, yeah, this book is too extreme. We can't continue business with you. So now we're printing from Greece, and we're shipping from Greece as well.
Pick yourself up a Rebel book before you can't get it.
Exactly. Like really, really before the Greeks realize what's going on, get yourself a copy as fast as possible. And it'll be good.
Well, man,
good for your life.
I appreciate the fact that you came on today. I appreciate the fact that you actually ended up contacting me for this one. And I'm really looking forward to what we're going to dive into next. Because now that I kind of got a little bit of like a groundwork of like who you are, where you come from and everything, I definitely think we're going to get a lot deeper on the next one, man.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And that's how it works with me. I like to start on the surface, go deep, and then go back up into the surface again with like a new understanding of it, Got
to lay the framework. Got to lay the breadcrumbs.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to like shock you all of a sudden, like it's all fake. Don't believe it.
Which is usually the problem with a lot of people when they're trying to relay stuff to their family is they just come right at them with that shit.
Right.
And coming from somebody that you probably seem to be on the same like mindset as me, where it's like you try to build up these logical arguments before you get to a point where you actually like lay down what you're actually trying to say. So it's like you have to build it up to get to the main point that you're trying to say. Because if not, you just come at somebody and you sound like you're making these completely irrational claims. Once you break it down into the pieces that brought you to the point that you're thinking, then it's like totally rational thinking.
Right. Because otherwise you sound like a crazy person who didn't take his meds, you know.
We've all been there, man.
Yeah, I've been there myself. So I've had some passionate arguments with my family. So yeah, but yeah, for sure. And then I'm excited for the second episode. You know, I think that's going to be even better because we can dive into more deeper stuff, into even more crazier stuff, you know. And I think it's going to be very, very exciting. For me and for your audience as well, and hopefully for you, you know.
Oh, absolutely, man. I love diving into these like psychology concepts and how they start mixing into the occult. So like, this is right up my alley. I'm looking forward to it, man.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, because you're a great host. Like, I really liked our conversation a lot. It was great. I really want to have more of this. It'd be amazing.
Same here, man.
All right, perfect.
If you guys enjoyed today's conversation and want to show some love, smash that follow icon and share this episode with a friend, or you guys can even leave a review or rating for the show on iTunes or Spotify to help fight this algorithm battle. Anything you guys do is greatly, greatly appreciated. And if you guys don't mind leaving those 5-star reviews on iTunes, then I will read them on the show and, of course, give you guys a big shout out. And if anyone would like to get in touch with me for any reason whatsoever, you guys can email me at inquiriesofallrealitypodcast@outlook.com. Or you can guys get a hold of me through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that I'm the most active on. Or you guys can also get a hold of me through the submission forum, which is available on the link tree. Or you guys can even call or text the hotline. That number is 313-364-1551. But if you missed that number, it is available down in the show notes. And if you guys have some free time, don't forget to check out the awesome friends in the community, IKNOWSQUATCH, Snarly Owl Natural Products, who actually was a recent guest on the show if you guys checked out that episode, Cryptoteeology, and Big Ape Threads, and our other friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices, Oregon-ite, and Sticker Mule, with additional discounts and credits available. More information on those is, of course, available down in the show notes. And every single thing that I mentioned throughout the show is all available on the link tree, which is available, again, down in that show description. And with that, hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Hope today's show has connected some dots in your own reality, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Have a good night, everybody.
Reality isn't what it seems. Abductees taking aboard a craft with a tractor beam. Is life a simulation or an astral dream? Aliens travel through black holes in different galaxies. Life is a bizarre odyssey, with a mic talking about philosophy. Well, Bigfoot is stalking campers as a Wendigo walks through the woods of sharpened antlers, using a Ouija board to talk to the dead like a necromancer. There's so many questions and not enough answers. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality. So if you're interested in mysteries and abnormalities, tune in and listen to Inquiries of Our Reality.